Well, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. It's really lovely to have you with us. My name's Tim, and I'm a church minister in Winklebury and Worthing. And I don't know how you found lockdown life, COVID-19. If you're anything like me, you're probably fed up with the word unprecedented. It's an unprecedented use of the word unprecedented, isn't it? Lockdown life has been unusual, to say the least. I guess many of us have had very different experiences. Some of us will have had good experiences, some of us bad. I suspect for most of us, it's been a real mix. One of the things I think we're not very good at doing as a culture is just taking a bit of time to stop and reflect, to think about things. And so we hope that this evening is an opportunity to do that, just to stop for a few moments and ponder. We were trying to think about how we can make this evening as engaging as possible, and for some reason it was decided that staring at my face for 20 minutes for the presentation part this evening would probably be a surefire way to get people turning off. So in an effort to stop people disconnecting, we decided that we would pre-record the presentation part this evening, and then when that's done, we'll come back to live, where we'll do the questions. At that point, I'll be joined by my colleague John, and John will be feeding your questions to me. I'm hoping that he'll filter out the difficult ones and just ask me the nice, easy one. Can I just encourage you, please do ask any questions you like. There's really is no such thing as well, that's not true. There is there's such a thing as a stupid question, but you know what I mean. Actually, if you've got a question, please do just ask it, because the chances are, if you're thinking it, other people will be thinking it too. There's lots of different ways of asking questions. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, then just type a comment underneath the video feed. If you're watching on our church website, then there's a little box next to the video feed. You can just pop your question in there. If you ask it via the website, it'll be completely anonymous. So if you prefer to remain anonymous, then that's the way to do it. Or hopefully on your screens now will also be a website address where you can enter your questions there. So any way you like of getting questions to us is fine. And let me just encourage you as well to, as we go through the video presentation, just to ask questions as they come up. Don't wait to the end to send us your questions. As you think of something, please just write it, and then you won't forget it, and also it gives us a little bit of breathing space to try and answer some of the questions as they come up. Good. Okay, well, let me invite you to sit back, to enjoy the next few minutes as we think about life in a COVID-19 world. Can you remember what life was like before COVID-19? Remember hugging people? Remember being able to post on a photo on social media without having to reassure everyone that your meetup was socially distanced? During this difficult time, we've realised loads of things about ourselves. We've realised how important relationships are. Isolation hurts, even for the most introverted amongst us. We've realised too how much we value our freedom, to be able to go where we want, when we want, for as long as we want. And we've realised that despite all the incredible medical advances of the last 50 years, life is still fragile. In the midst of this nasty virus, as our 3-year-old calls it, many have found themselves looking for signs of hope. We long for the day when we can hug our grandchildren, feel the embrace of a friend. We long for the day when we're not thinking about social distancing and news of COVID-19 deaths has been consigned to the past. During these difficult times, one resident of a street in Brighton printed off some words and asked the neighbours to put them up in their front windows so that when you walk down the street, you'd read this sentence of hope. It said this: "Someday everything will make perfect sense. So for now, laugh at the confusion, Smile through the tears. And keep reminding yourself that every cloud has a silver lining. It's a lovely thought, isn't it? It recognises the confusion and sadness of our situation, and yet points us forward to a future moment where the clouds will part and the sun will break through and all will become clear. It's wonderfully hopeful. But is it true? You see, the problem is, in a world where all there is physical matter, there is no ultimate purpose or grand narrative that makes sense of our suffering. As one scientist said, DNA neither cares nor knows, DNA just is, and we dance to its music. There is no guarantee of a silver lining. In fact, in a world of natural selection, the fight for survival often deals cruel blows. One tiny life form can wreak havoc on much more sophisticated versions. And the truth is that human beings have no more right to be here than any other life form. Suffering and death are just nature's way of maintaining the equilibrium. We look forward, don't we, to a time when things will be better. But in a world where human beings are nothing more than proteins, bones and bloods, we find that there is no reliable basis for the idea, the belief, that ultimately everything will turn out okay in the end. Perhaps that's why, according to one recent survey, a quarter of UK adults say they have watched or listened to a religious service since lockdown began. There was also a sharp increase in the number of people Googling prayer. In a crisis, as we recognise human frailty, we look to something beyond ourselves. We try and find a secure basis for our hope. But then, having said that, 3/4 of us still haven't turned to God. Why would we? Lockdown life may not have been easy, but actually it's been quite good. No commutes, more time together as a family in our nice house and garden, cycle rides, time for DIY, and no one we know has been that ill or has died. In fact, according to the Office of National Statistics, 40% of adults had said their life has improved during lockdown. If belief in God then is what some need to get them through, then fair enough. But to be honest, you're happy enough without him. After all, we don't need gods. We should put our hope in humanity for the better world we long for. And we've seen over the past few weeks just how much kindness humanity can bring to the world when we really have to. Communities coming together, WhatsApp groups being formed, clapping for our carers, providing meals for people, delivering prescriptions and food. It's been wonderful. But at the same time, we've seen the other end of the scale. The panic buying which left many of the most needy in our society and our key workers struggling to get food. Beaches left in a complete mess. Illegal raves or parties, violent protests, abuse of the police, and just a general unwillingness to heed the lockdown rules. Of course, that's even before we get started on the things people have said to each other on social media. We might argue that's just a small minority. But COVID-19 has exposed the underlying selfishness and inequality which scars the human race. How can it be, after thousands of years of human history, that we still live in a society where people with a certain skin colour are more likely to die of COVID-19? How can it be that some people can receive all the medical care they need, whilst others around the world don't even have access to basic health care, or are turned away from hospitals because there isn't space for them? And how would you feel if your taxes were drastically increased to ensure those with less are provided for as a result of the economic turmoil resulting from COVID-19? See, the kindness and sacrifice of people has been wonderful to see, but how long will our generosity last when it becomes much more costly to us? Do we really think that humanity can break free of the individualism that shapes our lives in order to deliver a better future for all? The testimony of history is that we can't. I wonder too, if we're being really honest, whether it's realistic to think that we'll ever access the life we long for. As we've thrown ourselves into creating our own little paradise of family, home, garden, work, lockdown has shown us that the things we love the most are also the source of much of our pain, frustration and hurts. The more love, time or money we invest, the more we are aware of what we lack. These things just don't fulfill us like we hope they will. Again, according to the Office of National Statistics, our experience of COVID-19 has led over a quarter of us to want to make significant life changes to our relationships, job or home. Life has moments of glorious joy, and yet they never last. We're always looking for more, hoping for better. Suffering and ill health are often our chief tormentors, whether our own struggle or the pain of people we love, from the common cold to cancer and COVID-19. All these things hinder our ability to enjoy the life we think we deserve. It's not surprising then that one of the moments in lockdown that gave us all hope was the news that those clever people at Oxford University were developing a vaccine. What a difference that will make to our lives. And we long for that day. But then how long before COVID-20 or 21 come along? Or we face another illness, or we just grow old as our time on this earth draws to a close. The daily death count of COVID-19 has made us uncomfortably aware of our mortality. We don't normally talk about death. We ignore it because many of us fear its uncertainty and finality. And it hurts because it ends hope for good. Those words in the window, they sound lovely, don't they? But you probably wouldn't say them to someone who's just lost a loved one to COVID-19. The death of someone close to us changes our lives forever, and not normally for the better. Apart from someone no longer being in pain, there is very rarely any silver lining. Smile through the tears? Well, apart from memories, death gives us precious little to smile about. So we find ourselves in the middle of a global pandemic, longing for a better world, and yet unable to fulfill that desire. We're left looking for hope, and yet we can't find any basis for such optimism. We said earlier that this search for hope led many to watch a church service online or to Google prayer. But is belief in God just wishful speculation for those who need something to cling to? And how can we be sure that God actually exists? If he does exist, what is he, she or it like? One of the problems in this global pandemic is that we just don't know who to believe or who we can trust. Politicians, the experts following the science, or the other experts who disagree with them. It's understandable, given our current cultural climate, that we might be sceptical of any truth claim made by a religion. And perhaps that's why we don't take the accounts of the life of Jesus very seriously. These records, known as the Gospels, contain the details of Jesus' life and teaching. They document some events so extraordinary that you might describe them as unbelievable. But the writers claim to be writing about real people, real events, real history. And their accounts are based upon eyewitness evidence. Most of them would be killed for their beliefs. There was no personal gain for them in making this stuff up. They write the truth as they see it unfold before their eyes. And they write passionately, because Jesus had changed the way they saw the world. He had given them hope, a hope of a better world, a hope of receiving the life they longed for, a hope that not even death could snuff out, and a hope that was based on secure foundations. So you can imagine how gutted they were when Jesus said that he would be leaving them, by which he meant his death on a cross. Their hopes and dreams were left shattered. But Jesus wants to reassure them. In a strange twist, he insists that his death is not the end of hope, but the beginning of its fulfillment. That in fact his death is the very cause and basis for hope for all humanity. As Jesus looks ahead to his death, Jesus' words to his closest friends are recorded in one of the accounts of his life by a guy called John.
Jesus says, do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. Sounds a bit cryptic, doesn't it? So let's reflect on those words a bit. Believe in God, believe also in me. Jesus invites his friends to believe, but to believe what? Well, previously to this, Jesus has spent nearly 3 years travelling around making a claim that was pretty extraordinary even to the God-fearing people of the time. He taught that he was God the Son, come to earth to reveal God to the world. A huge claim, and yet his words had such authority and power. With his voice he gave sight to the blind, hearing to the deaf, the paralysed walked, sickness was healed, and incredibly people were raised to life from the dead. Jesus says to his friends, you believe in God, so believe in me, for I too am God. It's an extraordinary claim, yet one that can be weighed and tested, seen, heard and touched, a life recorded in the pages of history, and a life that makes sense of our daily human experience. If Jesus really does reveal the God who is there, he reveals a world that was created and designed, a world where life isn't the product of a random genetic mutation, but has purpose, reason and hope. One day everything really will make perfect sense. But if that is who Jesus really was, why did he die? Well, Jesus reveals the answer when he says, I'm going there to prepare a place for you. God stepped into the world in the person of Jesus to prepare a future home for us, to give us hope, hope of a new world like this one, but perfect, a world where life never ends. Jesus described it as a room. It doesn't sound particularly wonderful, does it? But don't be deceived. Imagine living in a world where all the longings of this life found their fulfillment. Lockdown has shown us we long for relationships. We've seen glimpses of humanity at its best and most beautiful. Well, imagine a world of perfect beauty, peace and love, where our kindness was never tainted by selfishness. Lockdown has shown us we long for freedom. Imagine a world where we were truly free to be the people we were designed to be. A world where all people were truly equal. Lockdown has shown us that human life is fragile. Imagine a world where sickness and pain were not even a possibility. A world where there was nothing to fear because death was dead. But how do we get this life? Well, Jesus goes on to say, I am the way, the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Notice here that Jesus is less concerned about what the room is like and more concerned about who is there, God the Father. You see, what Christians long for most and what is central to our hope is not a place, but a relationship. Jesus reveals that human beings are more than DNA, more than proteins, bones and blood. We are hardwired to love and to be loved in relationship with each other and crucially with God. Only this relationship with God fulfills us and makes us whole. But we reject God and we try to replace him with the stuff he made for us to enjoy. As a result, we've become distant and cut off from him. A few weeks ago in lockdown, a friend of mine was stood at the airport arrivals gate waiting for his son to return home from Africa after his charity work was brought to an abrupt end. And my friend describes the excitement and anticipation of being reunited with his son, and yet also the pain of not being able to hug the boy he had known and loved for the previous 18 years. Only 2 meters away and yet painfully distant. Jesus reveals the God who is there. The God who's made us to know and enjoy his love in a perfect world. He is so close to all of us, and yet Jesus also shows us that God is painfully distant from us. Our rejection of him through our human pride and selfishness leaves us cut off from God, guilty and shamed before him like an adulterous husband or wife. But God steps into the world to reconcile us with himself. On the cross, Jesus takes our shame, dies in our place, taking the punishment of God that we deserve, so that instead we might receive God's loving embrace as he welcomes us home. And when you are loved like that, when you know that one day you will be in a room with that God for all eternity, then you can say with utter confidence, someday everything will make perfect sense. So for now, laugh at the confusion, smile through the tears, and keep reminding yourself that every cloud has a silver lining. And the reason that we can have that sort of hope with such certainty is that Jesus didn't stay dead. He rose from the grave, proving that he can deliver on all of his promises of this life with God in a perfect new world. And therefore we can have hope, not speculative optimism or wishful thinking, but certain confidence. About 5 years ago, Jeremy Marshall was told that his cancer was not curable. Well, wonderfully, he's still alive today, but his fight against cancer has been a difficult journey. He describes how problems with his eyes left him nearly blind. He's had numerous operations, radiotherapy, and several rounds of chemotherapy. But despite all that, he has a certain and unshakable hope. He wrote in the Spectator magazine recently, "I recently attended a funeral where the celebrant said mournfully, 'There is no answer to death.' But I believe there is, and it brings me great hope. In the short time left for me in this world, I can think of nothing more important than sharing that hope with others." The relationship with God that Jesus makes possible begins now and lasts through death into eternity. Jesus meets us in our confusion and sadness and points us forward to the day when everything will make perfect sense. So this evening, Jesus invites you to believe in him and through him to take your place in that beautiful room and to receive the life you were made for. He invites you to know unshakable hope.
Great. Well, there we go. Thank you for watching. I hope that was provoked some thoughts, some questions, perhaps raised some things you've not thought about. And it's probably very likely that there was some of the things in that video you thought, I'm not sure about that. I think Tim's made a bit of a leap there, or he's I'm not quite sure how he got to that. So if you've got questions or you're not sure about any of that, please do just fire them into us now on the website or via YouTube or via Facebook or any other means. I'm going to introduce John. John's going to take over from here. John is my boss and the rector of Winkelby and Worthing Church. And John is going to feed me your questions. Over to you, John.
Sure. Hi, and thank you very much for that, Tim. Really good, and thank you for sparing us staring at your face for 20 minutes. It's very considerate of you. Tell us a bit about yourself. How have you found lockdown?
Yeah, I think like for lots of people, it's been a real mixture of highs and lows. When lockdown first came in, I think my overall feeling was, just think of the jobs I'm going to get done. I wrote my list, my DIY tasks, had it all planned out. I thought more time with the kids at home. I was thinking, this is obviously it's very sad that people are really suffering and dying. But for me personally, I thought, this is all right. But I think I found that as we went through lockdown, things got just harder and harder. You're trying to work out how you can get fresh air and leave the home. And we live at home. We've got a nice house, but there's quite a few of us in it. There's 7 of us here, and you're living on top of each other and trying to work from home. And increasingly, I found myself getting just, I guess, emotionally lower and lower. And there was a couple of weeks where I really was not in a great place, which is quite unlike me. I think as lockdown went on and it began to ease, and I hate to use the phrase the new normal, but I sort of settled into the new normal and adjusted, and it's been a bit better since then. But it's an interesting and hard time in many ways.
And you mentioned it's a full house. How have your 5 children coped?
Yeah, I mean, at one level, it's brilliant because there's so many of them. They can interact with each other, and there's lots of laughter and fun. At the same time, I think we've been surprised at just how much it's affected them, how much they've missed their friends, how lethargic they've become in some ways, and just really quite down. And yeah, it's been hard for them, I think, as well. A lot harder. I thought they'd be just taking their stride, but actually it's been tough for them.
Yeah, yeah. Clearly, your faith means a lot to you. Tell us what kind of difference it's made to you on a day-to-day basis, particularly during this pandemic.
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is that having a faith doesn't make you immune from the struggles that all of us face this time. I think sometimes there's a perception if you've got a faith, you just sort of coast through, life on a cloud of happiness, and that's not been the case. Where I've not been immune from the struggles. I guess what my faith does is it puts my struggles into a perspective. Let me give one example. At the beginning, we were watching the daily briefings, and you see that death toll just go up and up and up, and you begin to think, what about if that's someone I love, someone I know? What if it's me? What if it's one of my family? And I think there was a lot of us, probably myself as well, who were inclined to be quite fearful, quite anxious. Where can I go? And actually, as I reflected, that was one of the areas that my faith really, really helped, because my faith in God, it means that I believe that there is a God and that nothing is outside of his control. Now, okay, that might raise a few questions for people, but for me, it was a wonderful comfort to know that this pandemic didn't surprise God, that he is in control, and he cares about my individual life and cares about every human being. And so I can trust him. I can trust him with my life. Doesn't necessarily mean that I won't get COVID-19, but it means I can have a very certain, secure hope, trust that God's plan will be worked out, and it will be good.
Occasionally people say something like, oh, I wish I had your faith. What would you say to someone who put it in those terms?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think one of the things I'd say to that is I think we all have faith, actually. We all have belief in something. So we might not be able to articulate it, but I think we all have a worldview, if I can use that phrase. We all have an understanding of who we are, why we're here, what the purpose of life is, why there is suffering. And we sort of put our faith in the idea that those convictions are true. It's interesting that many of us have actually never thought about those things. We've just made assumptions. I mean, they're pretty big questions to make assumptions about, aren't they? And so I think for me, we all have faith. The question is, what do we put our faith in? And sometimes I feel like my faith is really quite small. But my faith is in the person of Jesus Christ. And I've just said a little bit about him and who he was in the video. I believe he was the Son of God walking on this planet, and I believe that he made God known, and therefore he reveals the reason and purpose behind everything we see. And so my faith sometimes feels a bit weak and fragile, but actually I'm certain and confident in who Jesus was, and therefore my faith, if you like, gives me hope, as I was saying in the video. So I think we all have faith. And if people want faith like mine, well, there's nothing special about it. It's just looking at the eyewitness accounts of Jesus, and I guess believing. That's all my faith is, believing that what John and the others said about Jesus is true.
So it's not so much the amount of faith you have, or the size of your faith, or how strongly you feel your faith, as much as what you've put your faith in, or who you've put your faith in.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Jesus in one of the gospel accounts talks about faith as small as a mustard seed, tiny, 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 tiny. But because Jesus is the king of the universe, tiny faith in a great God gives wonderful hope and security and comfort.
I think many people have found that their attitudes to all sorts of things have changed during lockdown, during the pandemic, attitudes to possessions and money and stuff. Do you think our faith, the faith that you and I share, has something to say to that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. A really good friend of mine talked about how one of the things that was getting him through lockdown life was the daily delivery from Amazon. It was, a tongue-in-cheek comment, but there is something, isn't there, that little adrenaline buzz about buying something new, about acquiring something, about doing the garden, about getting another bit of the house slightly more perfect. But I think what we've realized during COVID-19 is that actually life is so fragile. This one, like I said in the video, this one tiny genetic mutation has just done untold damage across the world. And you start thinking, well, my house, my car, my garden, my stuff, it is great, but actually it's just stuff, and it's fragile. And Jesus tells many parables, and the gospel writers write them down for us. And there's one where Jesus talks about a rich farmer who has such a bumper crop. He thinks, where am I going to put all this? So he builds bigger and bigger barns, thinking, this will keep me going for life. Now I'm set. I can sit back, eat, drink, and be merry. Life's good. And then that very night, his life was taken from him. He died. And Jesus says, what good is that stuff to him now? It's sobering. And I guess, I'm not immune from wanting to have a nice car and nice things. But again, I think my faith puts those things into perspective and say, these aren't the places where we'll find joy. And if we do find joy, it's temporary. I guess one of the things I've found is the more you get, the more you want. I don't know if other people have found that. It's like a little adrenaline buzz, isn't it? The more we do on the house, the more we do on the garden, the more stuff we buy, the more we want. And it's like this insatiable thirst that we can never quite satisfy. It's almost like we were made for another world. We were made for a place where we can fulfill these desires, but we're looking in the wrong place.
Okay. One question that has come in, just to really elaborate on what you've said already, I think, how has faith in God changed the way you've reacted to the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it means that I'm just a little bit more stable. I mean, like I said to you in the first question, definitely some lows, but I think the lows weren't as low as I could have gone, and the highs aren't as in terms of the things I can find joy in now, aren't quite so high. Basically, my faith has kept me on a level. For a number of different reasons. One, because, like I said earlier, I trust that God is in control. And I guess the thing for me is, I don't need to fear. I don't need to feel anxious. When I do feel anxious, for me, prayer is something that's really important. I can bring those fears and anxieties to God, share them with Him, and know that He hears and He's with me. And I think for me, the big thing, and I talked about this a little bit in the video, and I think it's not something we like talking about, but for me, the greatest fear that a human being can have, I think, is death. That's the thing is why we don't talk about it. It's just so final. It's the end of hope. It separates us. And know that actually Jesus offers me a way through death. He offers me an eternal life with Him in a perfect paradise. Means that the worst that can happen to me in this world is I die. And yet actually for me, that is to go to this heavenly room, if you like, to be with God, and then eventually a new world, a paradise, a perfect world where there is no more suffering, no more COVID-19. So I think that hope, that if you think not even death can affect me in that sense, then what, come on, world, do your worst.
Yeah. Great.
But that, just to say, that doesn't make you immune from, it doesn't make you immune from the pain of death now. doesn't make you immune from the struggles of COVID-19 life. It just gives you hope through them.
Yeah. And as you were saying earlier, it doesn't make us immune from emotional ups and downs as well.
No. And just to know that Jesus has walked this path. So for me, one of the things I think about is I don't want to believe in a God who, has no idea what it's like to suffer. A sort of distant God who creates the world and then just lets everyone get on with it and says, oh, you've messed this world up, I don't care. No one wants to believe in a God like that. But the God that Jesus reveals is a God who steps into the world, who steps into the brokenness and the mess and experiences it and sees firsthand the pain and suffering and starts to put it right, starts to heal people as a sign of what he wants to do for all of us.
Yeah. Faith is obviously related to trust, and someone has asked, if we're scared to go outside, scared to catch the virus, does that mean we're not trusting God enough?
Ooh, good question. Sometimes people use the phrase blind faith, as if to say faith is basically where you sort of throw your brain out, you stop thinking, and you just sort of trust. It's blind. There's no evidence for it. It's just the sort of faith that makes you feel good about life. But I don't think that's the Christian faith, and it's not the faith that Jesus reveals in the Bible. The Christian faith is one that's based on evidence. It's reasonable. We don't throw our brains out, we engage our brains. Now, what's that got to do with the question? Well, the answer, I think, to that question is we don't throw our brains out when we start living in this world. So faith in God means that we trust him through the mess, but it doesn't mean we stop being sensible or taking precautions. There's certain things I make sure my kids don't cross a road without looking. That's not lack of faith. That's just being a human being and being sensible. So no, I don't think that's lack of faith at all. I think it's being a sensible human being. But actually, there's a sense in which if we're being sensible, we don't have to hide away. We can trust that God is with us and will look after us. Whatever the situation.
Thank you. Here's another one. Do you think that coronavirus is God's judgment on us?
Ooh. Let me say no to start off with. Let me explain. There is a sense in which the God of the Bible doesn't start, zapping people and saying, generally doesn't start zapping people saying, you've not listened to me, you've not had faith, therefore this is what's going to happen in your life. But I think what we do see in the Bible is God saying, look, if the world bears the scars, if you like, of a humanity that has rebelled against him. So the world was created to be a paradise. It was good. And actually, from Adam and Eve onwards, human beings have pushed away God. So look, we don't want you, but we want your stuff, and we're going to put all our hope and confidence in this stuff and just reject you. And it's like almost at that point that the world cracked and was broken. It was warped. It sort of shattered. And so now we live in a world which bears the scars. And so things like suffering from COVID-19 are, if you like, symptoms. They're scars. So is that God judging the world? Well, no and yes. It's a sense in which this is a consequence of a world that's broken. But if it was an individual and they died from COVID-19, would I say that is God's judging them? No, I don't think that's the way God works. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yes, it does. And in fact, the next question is related to it, but makes it a bit more personal, I guess. Why would God want people to suffer? So many people have died, and many have been unable to attend the burials, the funerals of the people that they love. How would you answer that?
Oh, it's a hard question, and I've taken one of those funerals. I've taken a couple of those funerals. 4 people at one funeral, 3 people at another. Yeah, very, very difficult. I think the short answer is that God doesn't take any enjoyment from seeing human beings suffer. No enjoyment at all. In fact, I think it pains him. There's this moment in John's Gospel where John describes Jesus going to the grave, the tomb of his friend Lazarus, who died. And as Jesus walks to the tomb, Lazarus had been there for 2 or 3 days. And it's the shortest verse in the Bible, actually. It just says Jesus wept. And that phrase wept, it's like if you look at sort of the original languages of the Bible, it's like a snort of anger. It's this emotional outburst from Jesus, as if to say it shouldn't be like this. It was not supposed to be like this. So I don't think God takes any pleasure at all in seeing his people suffer. But then you might say, well, why doesn't he do something about it? Why doesn't he step in? And I think that's a good question. Let me give 2 answers to that. One, I don't think he steps in because actually he wants to honor our sense of human responsibility. So, he says, look, I want you to not to enjoy, but to really have responsibility. So you make your decisions, and the world suffers the consequences of those. So there's one level in which, he's not going to step in every time stuff goes wrong. But the second thing is, C.S. Lewis has this great line about how suffering is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. So it's interesting, isn't it? Like when life's good, who needs God? I think I alluded to this in the video. When life's good, we don't need God. We're fine, happy. But when we start suffering, it's interesting just how many people tuned in to some sort of religious service or started looking for prayer. But God, it doesn't delight in his creation that he loves suffering at all, but he does allow it in the fact that it might wake us up to the bigger reality that actually God loves us and wants to know us. And just going back to that moment in John's, when Jesus at Lazarus' grave, he weeps, and then he says, to the shock and amazement of people watching, Lazarus, come out. And Lazarus just walks out the grave. Now, this guy's dead. He's so dead that people told Jesus not to go in because his body would stink. So actually what we see in Jesus is a God who cares about our suffering, stepped into our suffering world, but also promises one day to give us new bodies free of suffering, to live in a world where there is no suffering, where there isn't even the potential of suffering, where there is nothing to fear. There's no illness that might get us. Sorry, I'm waffling. I hope that begins to answer the question.
Waffling helpfully, I think. And of course, Jesus didn't just step into our world of suffering. He suffered himself on our behalf. It's our God isn't a God who stays remote from suffering, isolates himself from it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I was paying so much attention to you. I've been not looking at the questions. What have you mentioned prayer in your last answer? What have you prayed for during coronavirus? I guess in relation to the virus and the situation.
All sorts of things.
Well, I've been doing some work as a chaplain at the hospital in addition to my duties here, and I've been going up for a couple of hours every Monday, specifically praying for the staff, for the patients, for their families, for the families of the staff. How about you?
Yeah, so I think there's been 2 sides to my praying, if you like. At one level, I've been praying for people who are ill, that they would make a recovery. Praying for doctors to have wisdom, so because I believe in that the God who can heal and does heal, I believe when I pray to him, God hears those prayers and has chosen to respond to those prayers. So I pray practical things. I guess I pray for my own family. I pray that they would stay safe. Pray for friends and family, and also for mental health as well, not just physical health, but for people's mental health. But I think I also pray that people might find the hope and comfort that only faith in Christ brings. Well, one of the things about church is that we have a number of older folk in our congregation, and many of them have spent the entire lockdown by themselves. They might have seen one person once a week. Incredibly hard. And so I think I've been praying for people like that to know that they might be alone, and yet God is with them. And that they can trust him, they can speak to him, they can Christians have this funny way of talking about God. We talk about relationship with God. I think it's a bit of a funny phrase, but I think that's actually, that is a helpful phrase, because that's what it is. We hear God speak to us through his Bible. That's what we believe, and we talk to God in prayer, and these things bring great comfort and reduce anxiety. So praying things like that for people, I guess.
That aspect of relationship, I think, begins to answer one of our questions, if I can see it. Yes. Does believing in God, sorry, I still haven't had my glasses changed, so I'm having to peer at my screen a bit. Does believing in God actually make any difference? How can we be sure of that? And I think what you said about relationship is perhaps part of the answer.
Yeah, I mean, it makes every difference and no difference at all. Now, let me explain the no difference. No difference at all, because my experience, physically, mentally, all the same pressures are on everyone. No different from me. I don't sort of walk around in a protected bubble. There's a trendy word at the moment, isn't it? I'm not immune from those things. So on one level, it makes no difference, but on another level, it makes every difference, because it changes my perspective on every single experience of my life. Just trying to think of an example, really. I've talked about it in terms of my death and anxiety, fear. It talks of, I guess, relationships. Let me give this an example. One of the things that I think lockdown has shown us is that we're hardwired for relationships, to love and to be loved. And actually, one of the most painful things has not been able to have relationships. I'm a real hugger. People need, when lockdown's finally done, people need to stay out of my way, because I'm going to be hugging everyone. And so if you're not a hugger, just give me a wide berth. But I particularly feel that real loss of intimacy, of touch, of connection. And I think one of the things that's reminded me, I guess, is actually, it's a sign, it's a pointer to something about what humans are. As a human being, I'm not just DNA. I'm not just proteins, bones, and bloods. That all these sort of emotions and relationships, I don't think they're tricks of the brain to help me propagate my DNA to the next generation. I think they seem to be more than that. And so for me, that one of the things that I see is in my faith is it connects my experience in this world with my humanity. So the Bible says I'm not random genetic mutation. I'm made by God. I'm loved by him, and I'm made for a relationship with him. And so that makes sense of my experience now. I don't know if that answers the question really, but it's just an example to show how I think that the Christian faith is revealed in the Bible and revealed in the person of Jesus makes sense of my humanity, makes sense of my experience of life. And so that shapes every area of my life. And so I would say during COVID-19, my faith has got even stronger, because I feel even more convinced that what the Bible says is true, because it just makes sense of me and my experiences. I don't know if that answers the question or not.
I'm sure we'll get us a follow-up question.
Yeah, please do reply.
If the questioner wants to follow that up, and that applies to everyone. There's a personal question here. sad situation. I've lost my job due to coronavirus. I feel like I'm angry at God, but I don't believe in him. What should I do?
Oh, that's a really hard one, isn't it?
Hmm.
Yeah, just the anger thing is interesting, isn't it? That we almost have this. Go on.
No, I was just going to say, I was reading one of the Psalms, one of the ancient songs in the Bible the other day, and the writer was expressing his anger at God, and he clearly did believe in God.
Yeah.
So being angry at God in itself is permitted. There's no point trying to hide our anger.
No.
But I interrupted you.
No, I was going to say it's a sign, isn't it, that when stuff goes wrong, is like something that part of us wants to cry out to someone, and without God, there is no one to cry out to. Now, look, that doesn't prove that God exists at all, does it? I mean, that's just, but it's just a little clue that there's something about our human experience that when things are hard, we want to cry out to someone. And like you say, the great thing is the God of the Bible says that's okay. And I mean, in terms of losing your job, I think that's really hard. And as a Christian, I think it's even harder. And that's because in the Bible talks about human beings are made for relationships, but we're also made to work, to cultivate the earth. And so I think when you're coming from that perspective, to lose your job, to lose the way your opportunity to cultivate is really hard. I think the reason we find unemployment so hard is because it's dehumanizing. We begin to think, well, what am I doing? I guess part of the way to cope, of course, I'm going to give the faith-based response. Part of the way I would cope in that situation is one, to know that God cares about me, God loves me, and he has got a plan. He knew this was coming, and that God's always works out good purposes, even through things that are hard for me. So one of the things I can do in that situation is just trust him. Not immune from the hard things, the frustration, but it does give me a sense of hope, confidence that it will be okay. I was going to say something else, but it's gone.
Just while you're grasping after that thought, the question is interesting, because this person seems to want to be angry at something or someone, but as you've said, if there is a God who knows this person, well, if there is a God, he must know this person, must know their circumstances. Would you suggest that this person could try talking to God, having finished shouting?
yeah, definitely have a talk, and then I'd encourage also to have a listen. I mean, that's partly why we're doing this evening, isn't it? You think the Christian faith is so far off the radar of people. Normally on a Thursday evening for the last few weeks, I'd be doing a pub quiz online and having a couple of beers with some mates. So, we're not talking about God. They might mock me because I'm a vicar, and that's something to mock. But we're not talking about God. It's just so far away from us. So actually, what we want to do this evening is encourage people just to consider, to talk to him, to have a rant to him if you think that's right, but also to listen. And one of the ways I think you can listen is to pick up one of the accounts of Jesus' life, one of the Gospels, and read it and engage with the person of Jesus. See what he's like. See what he says. See if you warm to him. See if you don't warm to him. Why not? What does he say about humans? Does it make sense of our lives and the world we see? So definitely do that. And I think, I'm going to say this. I think, if I'd be a bit cheekily bold, I think it's harder when you lose your job or lose anything in life when you don't have a faith, because those things mean so much more. Because I think what we do these days, we define ourselves not by the value, not by some sort of innate value, because we're just DNA, we're just atoms. So what we had to do is create value for us. So we define ourselves by our jobs, by our family, by the size of our home, by the car we drive. All those things are like little badges of honor, career. And so if you lose any one of those things, you lose a lot more, because it's sucking at your value. Whereas when you're a Christian, you believe that our value is not something we earn, it's something we receive from God. We're made by him, and therefore we're loved, and that's what gives us value.
Thank you. And in practical terms, if that person did want to reach out to God somehow, what should that person do? I'd love to say him or her, but I've no idea who's asked the question.
Yeah, pick up a copy of Mark's Gospel, John's Gospel. We can send one of those somehow to the anonymous person, and yeah, just start reading.
Yeah, great, thank you.
If there are any other questions coming through, I have got one thing I could have said in the last questions that's slightly more controversial that might draw a few other questions in.
Okay, yep.
Yeah.
I'm just checking through my question feed here. Yeah, go for it, Tim.
So, okay, this might be slightly controversial, it's pushing it. I read today a bit about atheist philosopher called Peter Singer. And Peter Singer is really been exploring what makes human life valuable. And he's coming from an atheist perspective. And so basically he says there's no gods, human beings don't have any innate value, you know, there's nothing special about us. So actually what gives us value is what we contribute towards society. And this is the controversial bit. He says, therefore, there is more value in some animals than there is a small baby, human baby, because these animals contribute more to society than a baby does. Now that I think that is shocking. If you're not shocked by that, I think there's something wrong with us. We should be screaming at the screen going, no, that can't be right. That can't be right. And I say, oh yeah, definitely that's not right. But why is it not right? What is it that gives human life value? Anyway, there you go, a little sidebar, just to throw that out there.
Mm. Yeah, well, you did say it was going to be controversial.
Yeah, didn't I just?
Yep. But no questions have come back yet.
There is a slight delay, isn't there,
in the feed? Yep. Just checking all my devices. Okay. I just want to, I don't want to cut people off if they're busy sending in subsequent questions or follow-up questions, or wanting
John and I have
to
been doing various sound checks and tech checks today, and it's there's always that thing of what you talk about when you're filling for time. I tend to think I've got quite a lot to talk about, but then when you actually have to just talk, you know, your mind goes completely blank, doesn't it?
Yes. Okay. I was looking at your website earlier, lookforhope.org.
That's very good of you to mention it, John. Oh,
well, that's what you wrote down here. You wanted to say. One of the topics that's on there is from a student, a school pupil. When my studies are disrupted, what would you say to someone who's GCSEs that they've been working for, their A-levels, have kind of been thrown out of the window, and the whole of their future is up in the air as a result?
Oh, it's just heartbreaking. I really feel for people. We know a few people in that situation, worked their socks off for, however many months and years, and then for it to be, it's heartbreaking. I guess I'd say all the same things to the person who lost their job. We can have trust in God that His plans are good despite the frustration. The difference that being a Christian, having faith makes, is that exams and qualifications aren't everything. They're not the thing that defines me. So, if I get slightly lower grades this year, it doesn't seem fair, but it's okay. I'm not defined by my grades. I'm not. My value isn't in those things. So all the same questions, I think, all the same answers to the unemployment thing.
Yeah. Okay, a new question has just come in, and this is perhaps in response to the suggestion of reaching out to God as well as simply feeling anger towards Him. This person says that they've tried going to church, but that everyone seemed quite judgmental and distant. Why should I try going again?
Oh, it's just heartbreaking, isn't it? I'm just really sorry you've had that experience. I just think that's one of the things that puts people off Christianity, isn't it? Is hypocritical Christians who talk a good game, but then aren't very kind or aren't very welcoming. I'm really sorry you've had that experience. I think there's a couple of things I'd like to say. Is that when someone becomes a Christian, they don't become a perfect human being. So one of the things that we believe as Christians is that the way we relate to God, the way that we enjoy a relationship with Him, is not by being perfect. It's not by attaining a certain standard of niceness or goodness, but it's actually just recognizing that we don't deserve relationship with Him. Like I said in the talk, we deserve to be cut off from Him, but Jesus is full of grace and love and makes it possible for people who don't deserve that relationship. So when you walk into a church building, please don't expect to find a whole bunch of really lovely, nice, sorted, kind people. We know God's, yes, because of His grace, and He's hopefully over time changing us and shaping us to be more like the people we should be. The second thing is to say, sometimes Christians aren't just very nice. And I can only apologize for that, really. But I'd really encourage that person not to give up on church. Come along to us, try a different church, maybe go back. Maybe just people are having a bad day. Christians have bad days sometimes, and catch them in the wrong moment. But I think what I really believe is the thing, and the reason that we wanted to do this event this evening is that we believe that the things we're discussing are the most important things we can ever discuss. They are truly matters of life and death. And so just to sort of dismiss them because we've had a bad experience, as frustrating as that was, no doubt, I think, no, don't give up. These things are too important. I liken it to if you go into a shop and you really want a certain product, and you go into one shop and you have a really bad experience. If you want the product enough, you don't give up on the product. You think, I'll go to another shop. And I think that's, this is too important. Or the other thing to do is talk to a Christian friend. If you have a Christian friend, talk to them, ask them questions, take them out for a beer or a coffee, make them pay. And talk with them.
Yeah. It's interesting just thinking about the question, and obviously I don't know who's asked it, but it seems to suggest that there's a sense that if someone is a part of a church, they're going to be perfect. Therefore, if I want to try going to church, I need to be perfect too in order to qualify to be there. But that's not the case, is it?
It really isn't. And one of the things that people ask when they say, can I come to church, is what should I wear? Yeah. And it's a really interesting question, because when you come to our church, you suddenly walk in the door and you think, oh, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter at all. But I think the question comes because we think, what do I need to be like? One of the things that people often say to me on the door of weddings and funerals is, I was a bit nervous about coming. I thought the big man might strike me down when I walked through the door. And I think that's not what church is. Church is a place where people can come as they are. One of the great things about church, and about, when I mean church, I mean the people, by the way, not the building, but the church family, because that's what we are, is that you can come as you are. So I think a lot of the time in the rest of life, what we have to try and do is cover up our mess, because who we are, our value is in what we contribute. Any mess, any failings, any guilt devalues us. So what we have to do is hide that away, pretend it doesn't exist. And I think loads of us, if we're really honest, live with guilt, live with failings that we just can't do anything with. And the wonderful thing about church is when you walk in, Jesus and hopefully his people will say, just come as you are.
Yeah.
Fine. You're welcome here. Church is for people like you.
Yeah.
And it's striking, isn't it, as you look through the accounts of Jesus' life, one of the things that people hated about Jesus, and I mean hated, was they hung out with people who weren't religious, weren't good in the eyes of the culture, but he hung out with tax collectors who were traitors and hated. He hung out with prostitutes. He hung out with the poor, the blind, the crippled. All these people in this society were the dregs. You don't find Jesus hanging out with all the nice people, you know, at all the fancy parties. If he goes to the fancy parties, he causes a right stir because he's not for them. He's for the people like me who have loads of mess.
Yeah. Come to church and meet messy people.
Oh yeah, join the fun.
Yeah. So to whoever asked the question, as Tim says, do give it another go. I'm not saying that our church is better than any other, but I know that if our church was judgmental, there would be no one there because we'd all be judging each other. Yeah. But do give it another go. And particularly at the moment, because our church buildings, like many others at the moment, haven't yet reopened. So going to church is as easy as sitting in front of your computer or your phone. You can still be in your pajamas if you want to on a Sunday morning. Come to the same website, winkleburyandworthing.org.uk, and click on the Join Online button, and you can be part of our gathering every Sunday at 10:30 for about an hour or so. And of course, no one will notice if you leave halfway through or you arrive late. That I think is our last question. I haven't seen any others come in. Anything you'd like to say before we close, Tim?
No, just to thank people for tuning in. Logging
showing
on,
your age
tuning
now.
in, swiping, whatever. Yeah, just to say thank you for I don't know what to say. Logging on, whatever. And please, if anything this evening has raised questions or you'd like to know more, please just don't hesitate to get in touch with the person who's invited you, or send us a message to the Facebook group or an email or whatever. Please do get in touch. We'd love to chat more about these things. We've barely scratched the surface. We could do a different one of these each night for 5 nights and still, have so much to talk about. But we thought we'd spare you that. We thought putting you through one night was probably enough. So yeah, please don't go away from this evening and just sort of forget about it. Just keep grappling and keep asking the hard questions.
Right. Thank you, Tim. Thank you for all the hard work you've put into this and for putting yourself on the spot, ready to take any questions. Very grateful to you. Thank you too to David Tulloch, who's been behind the scenes pressing buttons and keeping the technology going. Thank you to Anne, my younger daughter, who's been collating all the questions and feeding them to me. And as Tim says, thank you for joining us this evening. I hope you found it useful. Let me just mention those 2 websites again. First of all, Tim's Look for Hope. There's a website he put together pretty much at the start of lockdown, and lots more answers to questions there. Some really thoughtful blogs, blog posts to read through. lookforhope.org. And then, as I said, you can join us every Sunday at 10:30 in the morning, and that's at winkleburyandworting.org. And that one's got a UK at the end, org.uk at the end. So thank you again, and hope to see you soon, maybe even in the flesh, and you might even get a hug from Tim. But good night for now.